Thank you. Come on, sit down. Don't stand up. The longer you stand up, the more you're missing dinner. So, I'm Larry Hanley. I did not go to school with Jeffrey Sachs, Chuck Schumer, or Larry Summers. Although my members have been hurt by Larry Summers, which is, just an interesting aside that, can you hear me, by the way? Okay. Back in 2009, there was a stimulus package. This is just a short story, little vignette that you ought to know about. Congress was prepared to bail out transit all over the United States with $2 billion in operating aid in the package, the overall $8 billion package. Larry Summers personally went down to Congress and screamed at the chair of the Transportation Committee and said there will be no operating aid for transit. Let me tell you what happened. Since then, about 90% of the transit systems in America have raised fares. Fares are taxes. These are taxes on the poorest people in our society. And I had to watch system after system raising taxes, then cutting service, at the same time that both parties in Washington were saying, in an economy like this, it's so fragile. You can't raise taxes on billionaires. You just can't. They're job creators, right? So the poorest people in our society who go out and work, back in the 80s, people got attacked for not working. They were lazy, they were on welfare, right? These are people that work every day. And those people were the ones that were, it was okay to raise taxes on. And again, this is, it's important to recognize, and I get beaten up every time I do this, but it's important to recognize that it is not just the Republican Party. Really. So anyway, and before I say a few more things, I'm going to be brief. Professor Sachs, we all get 3 credits for this class. Anyway, I just haven't got anything to say, to tell you the truth, and I figured that's a good way out of it. But the question I'm supposed to ask is why us, right? Why us? And I can tell you that, as Ken mentioned, in our union we have taken a whole new approach in the last 3 years. We are now, I tell our officers we've been taught for 50 years to negotiate, to arbitrate, to litigate, to legislate. And I'm going to leave another word out. But anyway, in 2011, they came to take away our ability to do any of that. And we're left, and I'm just going to speak for a minute about the labor movement. I think this applies throughout society. We're left playing a kind of a 1980s game in a 2010 world. And what we've been trying to get our officers to do, with some success, is to get them to go out and organize the people who ride these systems. We have more than 100 riders for every member we have in our union. And we tell them from city to city and state to state, and now we're in Canada starting it too, from province to province. By the way, Canada is a much more civil country than the United States, but it's, pardon? That's a low bar, you're absolutely right. But it's spreading there as well. So anyway, let me just tell you that we have had a great deal of success where people have bought into this idea. We have had places where in the midst of this transit debacle, places like Fall River and New Bedford in Massachusetts, they're actually adding bus service because the workers and the riders got together and they went to the mayors and they put the fire so hot under the mayors that the mayors went to the U.S. senators. And all of a sudden, they found out things can actually change and movements can happen. And that's really the one thing I wanted to say to you. I want to thank you. I came here tonight for that purpose. I want to thank Roseanne DeMoro also and the nurses for all the work you do keeping this alive and making it happen. But I want to thank every one of you here because it is the fire that will come from this room that will light up the sky for a lot of people. And I think also if you do have pointed conversations with elected officials, even though it may be uncomfortable, I think you'll get an important outcome. I think they need to hear from us that we're onto the game, that we really don't buy into this nonsense that, that things are just bad and we all have to suffer. And that's right. And well, look, there's been a 40-year crime wave in America, and we've been the victims, right? And I couldn't say that without thanking Labor Notes, because that was their headline this month, and it made me think. And it's really true. That's really what's happened. So one of the things, 3 years ago, I was down on Wall Street with Roseanne and the nurses. They had me wearing Robin Hood outfits and everything. Fishnet stockings and leotards. But I was thinking while I was there, because in case you can't tell with my Boston accent, I'm from New York. And I was walking up and down Wall Street, and I was thinking a thought that I had thought before. And that is that, and this is not to take anything away from the event, I was thinking, though, that we ought to take these protests to the neighborhoods where rich people live. Because we're not really making them too uncomfortable marching through the police barricades, on Wall Street. But also, I think we have to be creative. I think that the Robin Hood tax is one of several things that we can do. One of the things we ought to be doing, by the way, is calling for a maximum wage in the United States of America. And there was one once. It's not like, I'm thinking this up. There was a time when if you made more than $200,000 a year, you were taxed at 91%. And people thought that was reasonable, and it built a fair economy, and everybody prospered. Right? But now if you raise it, they'll say you're an Arab Islamist terrorist or something. They will. I'm not kidding. So why is it that any human being is worth the kind of money that these guys get? Can anyone explain that to me? I mean, why can't we establish some reasonable, outcome, like 1,000 times the minimum wage or 500 times the minimum wage? And I think that we ought to advocate that, and I think we ought to continue having discussions and figure out ways to have a list of things that we go out and demand. And the other thing is that when you hear this joke, that is the argument on all the media about Social Security being bankrupt, and we have to modify, curtail entitlements, right? The stuff we heard about from Professor Sachs, those aren't entitlements, right? The people that are walking off with billions of dollars, but the idea that some old person can actually eat because of Social Security, that's an entitlement that's wrong. And all they have to do is raise the tax, not even raise the tax, just raise the income limits. Start making people pay Social Security tax on all of their income, not just the first $100,000. So there are so many things that we can do. But it all starts with the ability to get into a room like you're doing and have the social conscience that you have, and to find a way to go out and try and lead others in this effort. And I want you to know that the ATU, and I'm not going to tell you that every one of our local leaders is there. Our members and our leaders are just like everybody else in America. They are often engaged in taking the heroin that is football and baseball and... Oh, you disagree, huh? Well, think about this one thing. I had this conversation. By the way, I get in trouble about this all the time. I sit around with 10 or 15 people, and they start telling me the football scores, and I don't really pay attention. I know the Yankees play football, but that's all I know. And a couple of weeks ago, I had this conversation. I'm almost done, don't worry. I hear the stomachs growling collectively, but... No, I had this really, this is true. I had this conversation. I said, how many people fit in a football stadium? And I don't know, 60,000 or whatever. And how many games are going on right now? And you multiply that out, right? And that is a small fraction of the number of people who are sitting at home watching on TV, right? While their entire country is on shutdown. while all the things, think about this. I mean, you want to get to the heart of the matter? You want to get uncomfortable with people we work with too? Right? So, while all of these calamities are occurring, while more children go to sleep hungry in this country than ever in history, we have a country that is tuned out watching people run a ball up and down a field as if that mattered. And by the way, Professor Sachs, I just want to tell you, you can say all the things you say, and they're important. They really are. You can even say them on Morning Joe. You'll get cut off. Well, you'll get cut off. But you will not be as unpopular as if you say what I just said in a room full of guys. And I just wanted to say that to you because, you're leaders. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And if you're going to lead, the first principle is if you're going to lead for change, then you have to be able to say things that make people uncomfortable and stand by it and lead them to change. So, where's Laura Flanders? Oh, right here. By the way, I saw that just recently, last week, 10 days ago, I saw your family on TV talking about Alexander Coburn. That was a wonderful, wonderful memorial that you did. So, yeah, sure. So with apologies to your British heritage. With apologies? No, I'm not going to apologize. I'm Irish. Let's get this straight. Well, when I'm done, we'll see if you have something to apologize. No, I'm just kidding. There's an old story, and people like it, and it's kind of a leadership story. It's about a guy named Lord Nelson. Have you heard the story about Lord Nelson? Okay, with your permission. So Lord Nelson was the best admiral that the British Navy had. And he used to go out and just sink those ships like nobody's business. And he had a regular routine. He'd be out sailing the ocean blue, and the guy in the crow's nest would scream down, "Lord Nelson, enemy ship on the starboard bow." And he'd turn around to his assistant, and he'd say, "Manservant," because that's what the Brits call their assistants. Sorry, it's the story. Anyway, he'd say, "Manservant, fetch my red coat." And the manservant would run down, give him his red coat, he'd put it on, he'd go into battle, sink the ship, and that went on for years. And finally, one day, as timid as he was, the assistant said to Lord Nelson, "Could I ask you a question?" And he said, "Okay, ask me a question." He said, "Lord Nelson, why is it that whenever we go into the battle, the same thing happens? The guy in the crow's nest screams down that there's an enemy ship. You tell me to fetch your red coat. Why is that?" He said, "That's a really good question." He said, "I'm a leader. And if in the course of the battle I should be struck by a bullet and the men see me bleed, they may lose heart and we could lose the battle." And his assistant said, well, thank you for explaining that. And months went by, and one day the guy in the crow's nest screams down, "Lord Nelson, 20 enemy ships on the starboard bow." He says, "Manservant, fetch my brown pants." Anyway, the moral of the story is, if you want to be a leader, dress for it. And I have one question before I go. What's going on with all the suits in this room? Man, I thought I was at a doctor's convention or something. But anyway, listen, again, I I want to thank you for the work that you're yet to do tomorrow. I want to tell you that even though we have a long way to go in the ATU, and we certainly do in the labor movement, I want you to know that we're working hard to get there. I want you to know that in the cities that you're doing work, it is our wish and desire that our locals work with you, and that we are doing everything we can to try and get our local officers into the game where you are, and not only for the Robin Hood tax, but for all the kinds of progressive politics and legislation that we need to engage in. So thanks again, and I hope you all enjoy. Is somebody else coming up, or is this Miller time? Okay, well, thank you, and listen. Just thank you. Thank you.